On behalf of the City of Jacksonville, we'd like to welcome you to this New River Roundtable. It's an amazing thing when you get a group of folks from various educational facilities, various city departments, various state and county agencies all to come together for one reason. And that reason is one of the jewels of our community, and that is what? The New River. We're extremely excited today to have Ryke with us as our guest speaker, but we appreciate the fact that each of you are giving your time because we have a common goal here and a common cause, and that is to continue to improve the New River and to find new ways for it to continue to expand its role in our community. At this time, I'd like to ask Pat if she would come forward and introduce Ryke. Pat?
Thank you, Richard, and welcome to the 2013 State of the River Address. With us today, our keynote speaker is Ryke Longest. He is a clinical professor of law at Duke University School of Law. He teaches water resources and environmental law. Prior to working for Duke, Mr. Longest was a special deputy attorney general for the North Carolina Department of Justice. While there, he ran the Smithfield Agreement Grants Program and litigated hundreds of environmental law cases. His family roots are deep in the Duplin and Pender County area, going back almost 7 generations. He also has a very close tie to the Wilson Bay Initiative, as he sat on the board that gave us our very first set of funding some 16 years ago. So, Ryke, thank you for doing the State of the River Address. We appreciate you coming today.
Thank you very much, Pat, and thanks to all of you for all that you do as volunteers and public servants and community-spirited activists who are working to help protect this wonderful resource that we call the New River. The New River has always been exciting to me for a couple of reasons. One is that there's 2 of them in North Carolina, and the other New River is really misnamed, as it's probably one of the oldest rivers in North America, in fact in the world. But this New River has always been very special to me because of the proximity to where my family and the generations of the work that they did in the clearing of this state and the settling of this state. They were all very active in the lumber business. They were also very active in the milling business. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But the New River did factor into that as well, even though for most of the time we were just a little bit to the east. So I'm very excited to be here today for a number of different reasons. And one of them is that I think it's really important for us to understand that water is one of those most important drivers for all economic activity, as well as for human life and the life of the planet that we love. But it has really always historically been a driver of commerce in eastern North Carolina particularly, but not just in eastern North Carolina, but throughout the world and throughout the history of the world. One of my favorite authors from my days in undergraduate was Herman Melville, and at the very beginning of the book Moby Dick, he talks a little bit about the people's fascination with water. Take almost any path you please, and 10 to 1 it carries you down in a dale and leaves you there by a pool in the stream. There is magic in it. There is magic in water, and all of us know this instinctively as children. When we see our kids at play, where are some of the first places that they learn to play? In water. Where are some of the first places that they have their most interesting experiences with the natural world? For many of them, it's in water. That was certainly the case for me and maybe for many of your children. And it's been that way throughout recorded history. I have here a picture of the city of Rome. Rome was founded on 7 hills, but the real treasure of Rome was the Tiber. The Tiber River was the thing that gave it its power and force and allowed civilization to flourish there. And as that civilization flourished, the Romans ran into some of the same problems that we face today and that many members of the city staff and all the community members have to struggle with daily. They had the problems of stormwater. They had the problems of sewage, and they had the problem of providing clean drinking water for all of their citizens to consume, and for the water that was necessary to drive commerce throughout the empire. In this picture we see in red illustrated one of the great innovations of the Roman Empire. Prior to Rome, there was not as much attention paid to the necessity of taking care of sewage. And those two red lines you see in that picture are some of the first buried sewer lines. Originally, sewage was treated and put in surface drains or ditches, and the Romans, as they walked about the city, thought that it would be better to bury that underground. And so this is the Cloaca Maxima, or the very first sewer in the city of Rome, and became one of the important innovations in Roman engineering. But that wasn't the only thing that the Romans innovated. They also knew how important water was for drinking and for daily use. They instituted a set of public works, and this was referred to as lacus. And a lacus is just the Latin word for fountain. Rome built fountains throughout the city, and these fountains were public good. Any person in Rome, any Roman, could draw water for free directly from the fountain. And the fountains were always on. These fountains were fed by the famous Roman aqueducts. The water that came in came from surrounding hills. Each one of the aqueducts would have identifying markers, and then the associated fountains would be identified with those aqueducts. So you would know the source from which your water came as you were looking to draw it from one of these fountains. Now, for those who could afford it, running water inside the house was a great luxury that many Romans sought. And this helped subsidize the free water for the rest of the public. So it was one of the first stormwater and water supply utility models that was ever floated, which was that it was free for everyone to draw water from the fountain. But for those who could afford it, they could have it piped directly into their homes. And they actually did this based on a diameter of the pipe. So however large the diameter of the pipe was that went into your home, that was the basis upon which you were charged. Rather than having a meter, it was a very simple system. You just looked at how wide the pipe was, and that was referred to as the vectigal. It was the vectigal tax. And in fact, this tax became one of the first instances of people figuring out how to steal cable. The Romans that in the middle of the night would sometimes dig pipes extending from their house into the local lacus and tap in illegally into the vectigal system. So the early Roman water utility director had to spend a good deal of time chasing down those who had illegally tapped into the local water system. In this system, the water was always on. The water was coming in from pressure through the aqueducts, through the city, and was always on. And this also was an important part of their commercial activity related to the Roman baths, an institution that we don't have, but was one very important for their commercial, social, and civic life. If you've ever been to Rome, you will see that this is the typical kind of fountain I'm talking about. Many of you have been to the large fountains, the big spectacular fountains that we see throughout the city. But this is an example of a fountain from about the time of the early Empire, late Republic period. And this fountain is about the size that you would have expected to see the average Roman drawing from. And the number of fountains increased over time within Rome to the point where there was one every approximately quarter of a mile. So no one had to walk very far in order to get one. Now these fountains that are still operating in Rome now operate under electric pump power. Nobody's still doing the aqueduct and gravity-fed system, but that was the way it was done. And before we transition on from that, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that for those of you who are interested, I have to give credit, complete credit for this information about Rome from the study of a book called Drinking Water, written by a colleague of mine named Jim Salzman. It's a history of the sources of drinking water, its uses, and how people have found ways to either make it a public good or a private good and charged for it throughout time. Some very interesting stories in there about London, for example, and New York City, as they had to struggle with the problem of how to provide clean, safe drinking water for their citizens over time. Now that we've come to finishing up talking a little bit about Rome, I bring it up because many of the concepts that we have in North Carolina law today, in the way that we look at water and the rights that we have in it, have not significantly changed from the way that they were viewed by the Romans at the time that that city was flourishing. In this country, we do have a history of giving private rights, though, to water. And those private rights arise under two primary systems in our country. One of them we refer to as the riparian system, and that is a system that predominates in the eastern half of the United States. And then the prior appropriation system is a system of laws that we use primarily in the West. We also have laws that allow private citizen rights of access to water. So if you own property adjacent to water, whether you're in the west or the east, you're going to have certain rights to access that water, including the right to get out your boat out and also to fish. In the east, we talk a lot about rights to reasonable use. That's what riparian rights typically refer to in the east, which is to say that each person has a right to use the water as so long as their rights do not interfere with the rights of others. We do not recognize, unlike the Roman counterparts, we do not recognize much, if at all, in the law of the United States, any kind of rights to exclusive use. That is, the ability to exclude the public generally from water. We're going to talk a little bit about a series of cases here that are very important for the development of this in the eastern half of the United States related to grist mills, and also about the public trust doctrine and how that relates to the ways in which the use of water and the use of the New River particularly encourages tourism. Now, in the United States, we had a very early decision to join the British law and adopt the British law and say British law is what we're going to use. But the problem with British law for the United States and for users in the eastern half of the United States particularly was that British law basically prohibited anybody from using any kind of flowing water in a way that interrupted the natural flow. This is referred to as the natural flow doctrine or the English rule. Now, this rule had some advantages because it promoted tranquility among landowners and peace between adjoining landowners. On the other hand, it inhibited commerce significantly. Now, the fact that it was the law of the land at the start of the American colonies meant that the ability to use rivers in commerce was significantly impaired by the law. So very early on, North Carolina's Supreme Court and most of the other eastern state courts overruled the English common law and adopted their own rule, which is referred to often as the American rule or the rule of reasonable use. And the purpose of that was basically to allow these grist mills, initially to allow these grist mills to flourish. Now, at the time that my ancestors came to this part of North Carolina, corn, tobacco, many of the other key staple crops had to have some processing done to them in order to make them marketable commodities. And of course, they were trying to then get access to ports for export for some of these, but also many of them were used just in everyday life. Corn is a great example. Farmers would grow corn and then dry it, and they would bring it to the local mill. And there was a regulated monopoly. There was a statute that was actually enacted by the colonial legislature that said you can erect a mill on any stream as long as there's no other mill 1 mile upstream or 1 mile downstream from you, and as long as you ground the corn according to turn, which is meant you could not show preference to your buddies or friends. Anybody who showed up first in line, their corn was ground first. You couldn't go to the back of the line and say, oh, this is my cousin over here, I need to grind his corn first. And that was important because if you ran out of water power before you got to that last wagon, that person had to come back another day. So they had a regulated monopoly. The idea was to use the water power, to give people an opportunity to use that water power to power the growth of farming in the colony. And it worked. Cornmeal became one of the staples of the diet. In fact, cornmeal was a staple of the North Carolina diet until the 20th century, and continued to be a very important, and still continues to be a very important commercial commodity in our state today, although grist mills are on the decline. This is an example from my neck of the woods where I live now. I live near Raleigh, and this is actually a county park in Wake County where they have restored Johnston's Mill, which was a historic grist mill, and it actually functions. So this has become a tourist attracting amenity where they've taken a tumble-down water feature and turned it into something that's actually a tourist amenity. On the weekends, they actually have people dressing up as historical characters doing the thing that they do best, demonstrating how the grist mill worked. And they'll grind corn, and you can buy grits and you can buy cornmeal there at the facility. Now, this led to a series of court cases. Since I'm a law professor, I feel obliged to teach you a little bit of law today. So the important piece for you to learn here is that at least as far as 1830, the North Carolina Supreme Court had decided that despite the fact that English law was in full force and effect, that English law didn't make any sense in North Carolina, and in order to accommodate the commercial need to encourage these grist mills as frequently as they could be put, this law was changed to allow people to do it so long as their use of the grist mill did not impair somebody else's use. Now, another important factor of our law is that even though we have cleared away obstacles so that private entities can find ways to make commercial use of our water, we still regard water as public property. The United States Supreme Court in Appalachian Electric Power case of 1940, talking about the other New River. This is the new section of the New River as it flows from Virginia into West Virginia. So it's a stream that's very flashy, even with rapids as much as stage 5 rapids on it, as navigable stream. And the United States Supreme Court points out that the flow of such a navigable stream is in no sense private property. And the idea there is that even though we have made the law a servant to commerce in saying that we're going to allow people to use the rivers for commerce, to encourage commerce, that still ultimately we have to recognize that the water itself is public property. So water in the United States, advancing from the Roman Empire, in the Roman Empire the concept was very strictly that water was government property. That is, it's the property of the emperor. And in fact, if you go back and look at some of those fountains, many of the fountains had imperial symbolism on them. And the intent was to remind the everyday Roman when they came and drew their water, that they drew their water by the grace of Caesar. And the idea was to point out to them on a daily basis that Caesar was what was providing them with water. It had a propaganda effect. In our country, we have given a lot of private ownership rights in water, but the ownership of water still rests with the public government, not for the purpose of enforcing some kind of propaganda, but for the purpose of the public trust, which we're going to talk about right now. So this is an example of water coming over a relatively low-head dam in North Carolina in the Piedmont section of the state. The public trust is a concept that developed very early in our law and in the law of the United States, which was that governments could not, even though they had an ownership interest in this navigable water, that they also had a responsibility that went with that ownership. And the responsibility is a trust responsibility. So we cannot, and it would be an abdication of that trust for the government to give away public trust assets without keeping something back for everybody's use and benefit. And for this reason, North Carolina generally does not recognize any right to exclude the public from riparian or littoral land. Now, those riparian and littoral fancy adjectives coming from the Latin. Riparian just means along a river, littoral just meaning along a big lake or body of water. And this is, put it in common context, we think about it when we're walking down the beach. When I take my family down to the beach and we go out and we start walking along the wet sand and dry sand looking for shells, it never occurs to any of us to go and knock on the porch of the person that or in front of the cottage in front of where we're walking and say, "Excuse me, is it okay if I take shark's teeth from in front of your property?" We all recognize that the beach in front of those houses, is public property. And in fact, anybody who walks out on the beach sees it regularly. People walking up and down the beach, throwing frisbee on the beach, fishing, enjoying themselves, and in fact, even in many places, driving on the beach. These are part of the public trust. And this is a recognition that the public has a right of access across this land. And the land that is submerged underneath these navigable waters, such as sounds or navigable rivers, the New River being a good example of this, the land underneath the New River is owned by the state of North Carolina in trust for its people. And North Carolina's Constitution also reflects this very early provision that's in the North Carolina version of the Bill of Rights, which for North Carolina, interestingly enough, is the first article of the Constitution. In the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights comes as an appendix. In North Carolina, the Bill of Rights is actually the first item of business. And among those is a prohibition against what was called exclusive emoluments. And believe it or not, there's an even more complicated word that comes after that. They basically mean that they were protesting against the fact that the King of England had in the past granted exclusive rights to the favorites in the court to use submerged lands and other things in perpetuity. And that tied up things like ferry routes and the ability to fish in certain grounds. And that has been prohibited under our Constitution. And so that was one of the reasons why we looked at the public trust, was as a reaction against what the King of England had done. And this is a simple example of some of the public trust rights that we were talking about. These pictures don't hold any particular significance, except that they're all ones to which I have rights because they're pictures of my family from one generation or another, or friends. And the rights that we have here in the public trust enhance and increase our tourist activity. Throughout the coastal plain, when you look at the beach activity that we have, when you look at the lakes, when you look at the river activity that we have, the fact that people have this right increases and enhances the tourist value of those resources. We see this example as well in inland territories. This is Lake Norman, which, as you may know, has other purposes besides public trust, but nevertheless is subject to the public trust. And look at all the development. If you go around Lake Norman and see how much residential development, commercial development, as well as recreational amenities have been added to Lake Norman, you can readily see that in making this subject to the public trust has actually expanded commercial opportunity that it wouldn't if we allow this to all be privately held by the person for whom this lake was constructed. Next, I'm going to show you the way in which some more free-flowing stretches, public trust uses, have been turned to commercial advantage. This is a map that was produced by the Yadkin Riverkeeper Foundation. It is of the Yadkin River, and it's specifically designed to help those who want to engage in tourist activity, in traditional use of the river, to have a tour guide, if you will, of the Yadkin River. So rather than breaking up the tour guide by an individual town or an individual city or municipality, this tour guide takes a look at what are all the possibilities along this river. And by assembling this information, it's made it possible for people to plan multiple day trips along the Yadkin River. And it's also encouraging people to use the river and to increase tourism in the area as a result. And another way that they've done this is something I participated in a couple of years ago, and many have before and since, called the Tour de Yadkin. And the Tour de Yadkin is sponsored by the Riverkeeper organization. They will develop a daily tour guide, and they will put on their website where they're going to be at any given day. And if you want to participate and paddle a stretch of the river on that day, you contact them and let them know. They'll make sure that there's a boat, a canoe or kayak, and other facilities there for you, waiting for you at the loading platform. And then you'll get to go down the Yadkin River and see different pieces of it. This has greatly enhanced people's understanding of the river, and by assembling an easy itinerary for folks, it's made it possible for people who never paddled this stretch of the river before to get their feet wet, so to speak, literally and figuratively. And this allows them to access the river and see what amenities it has. Along the Tour de Yadkin, many of the stops are also anchored around city or county parks or local Wildlife Resources Commission facilities. So that also familiarizes people in the community with where the access points are in their community and what other facilities they have for public and private recreation. There's also some private campgrounds that are brought into the Tour de Yadkin as sponsors. So you also have people who are able to learn something about what the private for-profit recreational opportunities are in the area. And it also tends to promote people who are in the business of selling paddling services and guide services. North Carolina, in the latter stages of the development of our Constitution, in the 1970s, actually incorporated a conservation ethic in its Constitution, Article 14, Section 5, to help protect these public trust rights. It's the policy of this state to conserve and protect its lands and waters for the benefit of all its citizenry. And this, and you'll see here, and it is to this end it shall be a proper function of the state of North Carolina and its political subdivisions, so that's including cities and counties as well, in the empowerment of the Environmental Bill of Rights. Now, one problem that I think in talking with North Carolinians about water is that it's such an abundant resource that we tend to take it for granted. I find this astutely easy to grasp when I teach in water resources law at Duke. About half of the students that I teach come from countries where water is abundant or from states where water is abundant, and the other half come from states or countries where water is very scarce. And so the first year that I was teaching at Duke was a year of drought in North Carolina, and I was talking to a student from Utah about our drought, and he started kind of snickering. And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Your drought is about 50% wetter than anything we ever see in our best year in the state of Utah." We receive 40 to 50 inches of precipitation each year on average. If you translate that out, it's 115 billion gallons per day on average in the state of North Carolina. Now, the population centers in North Carolina tend to be located in areas where this natural water supply is scarce That's why we have some of the difficulties in supply that we do when there are things that we think of as droughts. And because we have such abundant rainfall, it's made it very hard for us to figure out a way to make it economical to plan for times of scarcity. When you are used to scarcity, sometimes economic projects make a lot of sense that would be completely uneconomical in a state like North Carolina. But the thing that we need to recognize is that the future trend in North Carolina, and the trend now, is towards lower flow. In this diagram, this is a diagram showing all of the gauging stations, all of the USGS gauging stations in the southeast generally. And each one of these that has a red triangle pointing downward on it is a place where between the years 1970 and 2008, there has been a significant, statistically significant decrease in the trend in flow. So what we're seeing, particularly west of here and also south of here, is that these parts of the southeast are drying up. They're getting drier and drier as time goes on. Now, one thing that's very noticeable from this is that there does not seem to be a trend either up or down in this area of the state. So this is good news. And this is part of why I was very excited about coming to talk to you today, was that while we see scarcity in a regional area, and in the southeast region particularly, we see this scarcity, this trend towards lower flow, we see in this area a real possibility for having a resource that can be used as an economic development opportunity in far greater value than it ever has been before. One other thing that's getting into this is whether or not are we water hogs, in the sense, are we using a lot of water? I would submit that we are. If you look globally, it's certainly true that we are. But even if you look within the United States, comparison against other eastern states, we definitely are. In 2005, North Carolina, for example, as a state, had 44% of the population of New York State, yet we withdrew 85% as much water. It's even worse if you look at New Jersey. With a similar size population, North Carolina withdrew 75% more water than New Jersey did during 2005. Why are we using so much water down here? The basic, simple answer is the light switch. If you were to flip on a switch in New York versus flipping on a switch in North Carolina, flipping that switch uses water, whether you realize it or not. Now, that's not water that the cities control. That's not water that's under the ambit of the local water supply, municipal supply. It's water that is used primarily for cooling, for thermoelectric power generation. And the reason that we see such a big difference between ourselves and the northeastern states is how much the southeast relies on thermoelectric heat in order to generate electricity to help keep us cool during the summer. So we have this huge use of coal-fired plants and nuclear plants with once-through cooling. We've historically had abundant water, so it's made economic sense to do that. So in the future, there's a lot of potential for us to shift water use by increasing efficiency at the power plants and reducing those withdrawals at the power plants. There's a tremendous opportunity in the South to not only do we have an abundant supply, but actually to decrease our use. And that leads me to the point of commerce and water generally. Recreational destinations in the United States are increasingly being built around water. Water features tends to attract visitors in ways that any other amenity that you can come up with just really doesn't. Also, abundant and clean water is going to increasingly attract industry as well as tourists. So when you have enough water, you can have both. You can have a tourist industry and you can have an industry associated with manufacturing or other heavy industry uses. Now, dirty water or lack of water or both does the reverse. It repels tourists and repels industry. So the efforts that you all have undertaken as a community to rally around this wonderful resource of the New River and to see its long-term value is paying off now and will pay off even greater in the future, because cleaning up this water and creating a community that values that gives this place the sense of place that attracts new investment, that attracts visitors, and that attracts new industry. Blight, on the other hand, are some of the things that tends to take away from people's interest in moving to a place of all different sorts. I'll give you an example of where clean water has directly led to a major tourist and manufacturing facility in North Carolina, even though it's in that part of the state where we saw the little downward red arrow, Hendersonville up in our mountains where the flows and streams is low. The industrial park that they built outside of Henderson, fortunately, they located it on top of a very good aquifer. So when Sierra Nevada came calling, looking for a place to locate its East Coast brewing operation, it found this wonderful location on top of abundant clean water. And the main ingredient in beer is water. And so they found this to be a great place to locate. And because it was already zoned and everything was ready to go, the work between the state, county, and local officials allowed them to attract, even during a down economic time, a prime job mover in Sierra Nevada. That will also bring in tourists, because the Sierra Nevada brewery will become a tourist feature that will bring in more tourists to visit. Here's the National Whitewater Center. This is one outside of Charlotte. You don't have to go to remote places and hope that the water is good on any given day. You can go right outside of Charlotte and go to this whitewater park that's been created in order to create both a training facility for those who are interested in whitewater sports generally, and a huge recreational amenity that is generating tourism towards that area. Just up north of us on the Roanoke River, I've been working for a few years with the Roanoke River Basin Association, and I've been very impressed with the public-private partnerships that we see going on there. On the lower Roanoke, the lower river partners have developed a series of trails and have had volunteers working together with state and local officials to actually create camping platforms and trails on the lower Roanoke River. You know, it's kind of hard. The lower Roanoke River is this beautiful natural wonder of that part of the state. But getting into it and accessing it for campers was difficult because of the topography and because of the ground. So what they did was they created these camping platforms, and they've got them geolocated. Some of them are actually accessible by land, but many of them are accessible only by boat or canoe. I got this picture from the Chicago Times Tribune, which I thought was really interesting. Chicago Times Tribune travel writer had been told about this and had flown all the way down to Raleigh, taken a car, rented a car, went out to Edenton, stayed in a bed and breakfast in Edenton, woke up the next morning, drove down to River Landing and canoed out to this platform. And he wrote about it in glowing terms. They are using the lower Roanoke River and all the conservation that's been done there, the economic value that's been added there, to create an economic amenity and to create an ecotourism industry in that region that is supporting bed and breakfast, everything from bed and breakfast to local development. Now, in Jacksonville, this is your H2O chart. Clearly, the city has made a lot of investment. We see here Pat Donovan Potts, who graciously introduced me on this chart. We have a lot of people who are working to protect this resource. One thing I love about this chart, and I always love when I see these charts that speak some truth that these things don't usually do, look at who's in the box at the top of this chart. Citizens of Jacksonville. This chart speaks volumes about the attitude that this region has about water and its resources. You recognize that the people who are really protecting this resource starts and ends with the citizens. The people who are working for them as public servants obviously are taking their part. Now, this is a picture of the new river. Now, I put White Oak in there because that's what the state calls it. I don't usually like to call it that because this is the new river. Let's go ahead and claim it for what it is. We're in the New River Basin. And the New River Basin is something to be proud of. It's a tremendous resource, and it has tremendous geographic advantage, it has tremendous ecological advantage, and it has tremendous potential for development into the future. We look at the beaches that we have to the south. We look at the presence of the federal government and the Marine Corps and all the people that we have working there. This is a tremendous environmental treasure. We don't always think of it this way, but the Marine Corps, the Armed Services of the United States are becoming some of the global leaders in environmental stewardship. I'm going to say that again because people don't usually get it when I say it. The Marine Corps, the Armed Forces of the United States are becoming some of the global leaders in environmental stewardship and sustainability. Now, that's not saying it hasn't been without some struggles, but it is to say that the future of the Armed Forces of the United States is looking towards sustainability as one of the strategic objectives of the armed forces generally and for this region in particular. So you have an environmental sustainable business that has made a decision that that is the wave of the future for that business located here. And you also have this tremendous tourism potential realized and for the future. There are only 2 large barrier islands in the state of North Carolina that are more than 15,000 years old and that are likely to survive whatever nature may turn their way. If you go to Bogue Banks and you go to Roanoke Island and you see how heavily developed the forest land is, how high the dunes are, you can see evidence there that those islands survived climate change 100,000 years ago. They mounded up. They got filled with sand. They're very large. They're going to survive whatever might come. Some of these other newer islands are the ones that might have some vulnerability, but those are ones that are going to stay there. And here we are very close there. And getting those tourists who are coming to visit that place to add on extra time at the beginning and end of their stay, a lot of that's going to be about selling the water features that you have and selling ecotourism to people who are coming to stay. One of the things I'm very excited about this region, and as Pat indicated, when I was at the state of North Carolina, was very supportive of and continue to be a supporter of, is the Wilson Bay Initiative, Sturgeon City. This is a jewel that you all have to be proud of. And you shouldn't look at the people who helped with the grants for that and say they're the ones who made it happen. I didn't make this happen. You all made this happen. This was an effort of public-private partnership that's come through and weathered all kinds of storms, every kind of obstacle that could be placed in its way. And yet, I went out there today and was looking at it. It's a crown jewel. It's something for you to be proud of, and it's an amenity that you can build on with lots of other initiatives as time goes on. Science education now is creating a whole new generation of ambassadors for this initiative. So you have people that have come to this project, have participated in educational opportunities on this project. They've fallen in love with it, and they're ready to come back. Not only are they ready to come back, they're ready to tell their friends, their family, and that'll be a new group of people, a new generation bringing in tourism to this area as time goes on. They've come from everywhere to here. They've gone back to where they're from. They're going to come back again. So New River itself is a destination, but in the future even more so. Here's some demographic facts about tourism and travel. Over 1 billion people globally are going to turn age 60 by year 2023. A real turning point in history. Another turning point, China outpaced Germany in 2011 for tourism. 100 million Chinese came to the United States as tourists last year. 100 million. There is expected this year to be a 232% increase in U.S. visits by Chinese tourists this year. China, India, the developing countries in South and Central America, as people move from the lower class to the middle class, one of the first changes they make is to add meat to their diet. Usually the second change they make right after that is going on vacation. And education is also right in there with those top 3. We're going to see, as the middle class emerges throughout the developing world, more and more people coming to the United States, seeing what you have to offer. And you have something to offer that other communities don't. The White Oak Basin communities have the reputation of the entire basin. I don't know that you want to call it the White Oak Basin. You might want to come up with another name. The White Oak seems a little, to me, seems a little centric of that one little river. And really we should think of it as something different. But I'm going to leave it up to you as to what you should call yourselves regionally. I like the New River. I think the New River has a lot of style, and that's why I'm here talking at the New River State of the River Day. So maybe we should call it the New River Basin, but then we'll have to figure out what to do with that one in the west. The New River is a river of opportunity. And I think that if we take the opportunity to take what you've built here and turn it into a true bragging right, if you will, for your community, you're going to be amazed at the potential that it has to drive commerce, to drive tourism, and to drive growth in a way that will keep this region sustainable and viable for not just decades, but generations to come. At this time, I'll take questions from anybody who has them.
Speaking of water and stormwater, I know Pat and I deal with this one quite a bit. we're relatively low compared to the Piedmont and the mountains, and we have a lot more stormwater, surface water, drainage types of issues in particular. And a lot of people wonder, okay, who is supposed to be cleaning out their ditches? What happens when somebody else fills in and impedes the flow of water off of their property? And who's supposed to be taking care of that? Do you see anything trending more towards official management of some of these entities, more entities in other coastal areas towards trying to maintain that? And some of the pushback from it, of course, is then people are saying you're putting in some kind of a rain tax on them. Mm-hmm. So there's two sides to that, is half of the people wanting it taken care of and the other half not really wanting to have to help pay for that.
Right. Okay, well, to answer that, I'm going to give the law professor answer and then the college roommate answer. The law professor answer is this is a collective action problem, meaning that we have a lot of people who are contributing to a problem, but it's difficult to get everybody to feel that they're contributing to it at all, and therefore should be subject to having any kind of requirements on it. So we refer to that class of problems academically as a collective action problem. I shared a house with 7 others students when I was at UNC as an undergraduate, and I call this the refrigerator problem, which was there's always like bottles of salad dressing in the refrigerator and leftovers in little cups and maybe a half-empty carton of orange juice, things like that, somebody's cupcakes they got for their birthday they didn't bother to clean out. Those things tend to accumulate over the course of the semester in the refrigerator. And sooner or later, somebody's got to come along and clean them all out. Who's that going to be? Who does that responsibility fall to? And how is it that we make people take their own cupcakes out, if you will, and fairly apportion that? It's a very difficult problem, and it's a problem that we struggle with as human beings. North Carolina started its water management, the very first water management issues that we had in the form of government regulation, prior even to soil and water conservation districts, believe it or not, was this creature of statute called drainage districts. And drainage districts, I had the unfortunate opportunity to try and work with while I was at the Attorney General's office. And I say unfortunate because a drainage district once created can basically never be abolished, even if there's no longer any need for it. And the idea behind drainage districts was to get at the problem that you're talking about, the collective action problem. How do we get somebody to clean out the ditch? And what they tried to do is create an area that was draining to the same general location and then assess a tax on everyone within the district, and then have commissioners who would then go and drag the limbs out of the creek or strain through the ditch. The problem for us now is a lot of things are not so much the obstruction of ditches. That does happen, but changes in topography on the upland. So when somebody decides they want to put in a brand new driveway, and then their neighbor puts in a brand new driveway, and they put in a brand new driveway, and then a carport, and a new this and a new that, all of a sudden the street's flooded every time it rains, and everybody scratches their head. Why is it this way? Well, it's the laws of physics, and it's the nature of the hydrologic cycle. When you have rain falling, it's going to go somewhere. All rivers run to the sea, but the sea is not full. So tells us Ecclesiastes. This is nothing new. But what we've had to try and figure out as a society is how to assess those costs. And it's a difficult thing. There are many people who view that regulation as a attack on capitalism generally, to say that we don't like development, and because we can't stop development, what we're going to do is tax it to death. I look at it and I say, this is just the problem of dealing with what nature has given us, which is abundant rainfall. Long term, there's a problem that this is a symptom of as well, which is as we decide to put more and more impervious surface down, we have a choice of how we're going to manage it as stormwater. I was very pleased to see y'all have rain gardens as I was driving around. When you create structures like rain gardens and forests, you create natural structures that help bring water from the surface back down into the groundwater system. When you bring water from the surface down into the groundwater system, you slow down its transport. That does two things for you. One is that helps you greatly during times of drought. If you go to areas of the West and you look at what their streams are going through, what you'll see are the deeply incised riverbanks. They don't have rain, but when they do have it, boy howdy. I mean, it all floods into these arroyos, as they're referred to, and flows very quickly down to the nearest surface water stream. When you go through North Carolina, we see this lazy water. Sometimes we get upset based on our landscaping concerns. But what we should also be saying to ourselves is, this is good news for when we have things like hurricanes and other things like that. Our ground is spongy. Our ground is taking up water and holding on to it. And that'll help us during times of drought. So the water management scholarship will refer to this as the flashiness function of a stream. Is a stream flashy? When a stream is flashy, when all your streams become flashy, then droughts become more severe and become worse, become much more difficult for you to overcome. And many of the civilizations that have literally dried up over the centuries, where water was once abundant for use by all users and now has no longer become abundant, you'll see that at the same time the lack of abundance has started, we've seen a flashiness increase. We've also tended to see things like irrigation to the point where you end up with salinization or the destruction of sheltering things like trees. There's some intense archaeology now going on in the Southwest trying to answer the question of what happened to the Pueblo culture. You had this culture that flourished in southwestern United States, people building these massive structures and these huge areas of irrigated farmland. And by the time that settlers had reached west, these massive structures that had clearly been large apartment buildings built for large populations were being inhabited by a tiny fraction of people. Where did all the people go? Why did they leave? They've been able to figure that out doing an excavation of nearby rat burrows. Rats are really good, pack rats are really good at going and taking stuff from the natural environment and stuffing them in their nest. And because it's dry, these things are actually preserved for over 1,000 years out in the West. And they're able to look at these layers over time to see what kinds of leaves, what kinds of material, what kinds of bark that the rats were actually stacking up in their nests. And what they found out was that as they built these apartment buildings really tall, they cut down all of the native trees. And what did that do? Well, it meant that the streams became flashier. When the streams became flashier, all these wonderful irrigation canals that they had dug became their own undoing. The irrigation canals channeled the water. They had no trees to slow down the water and infiltrate it into the ground. When the water hit the irrigation canals, they dug them deeper. And when they dug them too deep, they fell down below the area that irrigated the side channels. And so the Indians had to constantly work to try and rebuild this structure that was crumbling, and it was all because they'd cut down the trees. Now, they had no idea that that was what was causing the collapse until they excavated this set of rat nests. What will be the rat nests that will be excavated to look at our culture? I don't know. I don't know what they'll look at. I reckon they'll dig up the landfill and see what we have dumped away and say, boy, this is a precious resource they threw away, and they didn't realize it. I think you all have learned the value of water, and I don't think you're going to throw it away down here. And that's the strategic advantage that you have globally, especially with your location here with the United States Marine Corps. There's a great example of looking nationally by all armed services at vulnerability of their bases. And what were they looking at as vulnerability for? They were looking at water. Water scarcity is a vulnerability. And there are many bases in this country that are vulnerable because of, for their future viability because of water. Now, does that mean they're going to abandon them? No. There'll be ways to figure out how to get water to people. It's just going to cost more. It costs more energy. It's going to cost more money. It costs more concrete to get water to those bases. And that bodes well for you. It bodes well for the future here because you are blessed with an abundance of water and a great river. So thank you very much. I did want to take this opportunity to thank Glenn Hargett, with whom I'd first become acquainted with Sturgeon City by giving him a gift, a token of appreciation from me. And this is a symbol of Duke University. Force for Nature is written by John and Patricia Adams. John and Patricia are graduates of Duke University. John Adams, 50 years ago, graduated from the School of Law, and he was the founder of NRDC and an all-around nice guy. And they both now live in North Carolina out in the mountains, but I thought it'd be great to give this to Glenn, and thanks for all the work that he's done down here.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ryke, we appreciate you being here and being part of the New River Roundtable. This organization came to be founded because of some folks that wanted to look at the river holistically and to share information about the river. And what you've done is provided some real backbone as to why we should be sharing information and what this resource holds as a future. So thank you for coming, and thank you all for being part of this special State of the River then. Thank you.
All right.
And good day.